Welcome to Off-Kilter, a podcast about the fight for economic liberation and what it will take to set us all free, powered by the Century Foundation. I'm Rebecca Vallas, and every week I go behind the music with visionary leaders and lightworkers working to reshape America's off-kilter economy into one where everyone can thrive and access the shared abundance that we all deserve. I think of it kind of like a weekly trip to the Marvel universe, but the superheroes I get to talk with every week work with law and policy. And this week, I am so incredibly excited to sit back down with a very, very good friend, Zaki Smith. He's a filmmaker, an entrepreneur, a powerhouse activist, and a leader for criminal justice reform, whose work focuses on ending the perpetual punishment that comes with having a criminal record in America and ensuring that a criminal record is no longer a life sentence to poverty in the U.S. I first got to meet Zaki during the 2-year policy entrepreneurship that he did with the Next 100, a startup think tank created by the next generation of policy leaders. And I am so excited to have him back on the show since there have been some hugely exciting developments in his work, namely Clean Slate automatic record clearing legislation that he and others have spent years fighting to make a reality in New York, passed the New York Assembly earlier this summer and now awaits the governor's signature. Zaki, you can feel my excitement even when I'm just introducing you. Welcome back to Off-Kilter. So great to be back in conversation with you. And before we even get into anything else, I just have to say congratulations. That was years and years of work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. In reality, I think to me, I think it doesn't really seem as long, now that it has happened. In comparison, me just sort of being new to the space, just in terms of, addressing matters from a policy space, it just didn't seem long in comparison to a lot of other movements and legislations that people have been fighting for quite some time. I think the thing with this is that it just made the most sense to do it, right? For this legislation to be passed. It just made sense.
And we're going to get into that, and I'm going to make you tell the story behind it and all the things that come next too. But before we get too deep into talking about policy and legislation, I want to give you the chance to reintroduce yourself to Off-Kilter's listeners and to share a little bit about how you come to criminal justice reform work. If my memory is right, and it isn't always, but I think it might be today, I think the last time I had you on the podcast was actually as part of a series of conversations I was having last year in 2022 with Next 100 policy entrepreneurs. And we got to talk just a little bit about your work as part of that. But I'm really excited to have this longer format space to go a little bit more behind the music because you're a pretty amazing person and you wear a lot of different hats. So where do you want to start in terms of talking about where the road you have walked that has brought you to this work?
So I did not, being formally incarcerated after being released from prison, like I had no intention to really, my focus was not on like policy or anything of that nature. My focus was mainly about young people. My path was like, how could I begin to work with young people? Because I knew that, a lot of the influence that had impacted my life happened as a young person. Right, which sort of set me on the trajectory, sort of the life path that I chose and the decisions that I made that allowed me to be, back and forth from prison from a young person, well into my adulthood. And so after, being in prison for the final time and just really addressing a lot of the issues that I was dealing with, even in my adulthood, it landed me back to, had I been connected to someone as a young person to help me navigate through a lot of the challenges that I was going through, I might not have been in this space. And so my thought was, how can I get home and like start interacting with young people, right? That are going through a lot of the experiences that I was going through as a young person, like really being forced to grow up very quickly, living in the communities that I lived in Brooklyn, born and raised in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And so I wanted to help young people address their circumstances, as a young person, so that they didn't take these things into adulthood that would land them in prison. So that was my path. That's what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. I came home from prison, and that's what I did. I went straight for it. I was a barber by trade, so initially I went into the barber shop where I would be directly connected with the community. And a young person walked into the barber shop and said that he had a community center and he was doing stuff for young people, and my antennas raised up. His name was Divine Bradley. And we are the best of friends from now, from then into now, and he gave me my first shot and said, yo, this is what you want to do? I said, absolutely. And I was standing in front of Canarsie High School in the detention space for young people, just sort of telling my story. And at the moment, that's all I had pretty much was my story and the things that I had went through and what I've overcome. But of course, it developed into other skills and, programming and so forth and so on. And to eventually working with another nonprofit organization and for about 4 years. And I was, subsequently released from this working in the school setting because of a criminal record. And for the first time in my life, I had questioned, wait a minute, I've been actually doing the thing that law says that we want you to do after coming home from prison. And I wasn't instructed to do these things. Like, I came home and hit the ground running, being impactful in the community and an asset to the community. And none of those things mattered at all. Only thing they understood and knew was that I had a criminal record and that I could no longer work in this space with young people. And so for the first time, I questioned and said, hey, wait a minute. I don't recall receiving a life sentence. And I discovered this terminology, collateral consequences. And when I heard and read the definition of it, it just blew my mind. And I was like, oh no, something has to be done about this. This is.
Yeah, that phrase collateral consequences, right? It gets used and there's almost no humanity in it. It's like it gets
Absolutely.
used and people are like, what does that even mean? Well, it means every door closed in your face, right? And the story you shared, when it's a place that you've already been employed, I want to underscore that just because I happen to know that part of your story. But sometimes I feel like folks don't even realize this is happening to you, but this happens all the time. Folks lose jobs they already have and are thriving in because of an old criminal record that they already had while they were, crushing it in the job, right? And that's one of the twisted parts of the system. So backing up just a little bit so that we can maybe lay a little bit of the foundation for some of the policy and legislative parts of this conversation. That was actually how you and I met years ago, was through that shared commitment to ending perpetual punishment, to eradicating collateral consequences as they get called in that legalistic context, and ensuring, as I often say, that a criminal record is no longer a life sentence to poverty. One of the reasons you and I resonated so quickly is we were both kind of understanding that life sentencing injustice that is so baked into the system. But so talk to me a little bit about the picture for folks with records in the US. You started to get there through your own experience and through some of what you started to realize was the system. But what does it mean for millions and millions and millions of people now to have criminal records? And what does it really mean in human terms for a criminal record to be a life sentence to poverty?
Yeah, I mean, you're just pretty much, as a person with a criminal record, you're really like considered sort of a second-class citizen. Like, you're just really ostracized from just access to the basics, right? And so, and even a livable wage, right? Even in the midst of obtaining some employment, right? A lot of it is not a livable wage. And so not only are you impacted by this, but your family is impacted by this. Being denied access to educational opportunities, being denied access to housing. And like I said, the basics, right? I was even denied access to an insurance policy. There's a law, you can't get an insurance to bury myself, just to be able to bury myself. And so the other impact is like this stigma, right? That individuals with a criminal record may not even apply for certain things because there's this book already in the back of the mind is like, do they hire felons? Like, you have to ask that question, or you just may dismiss it and say that that is not, we're clear that those things are not for us over there. Like, we're over here and that's over there, and that's not for us. And so that's what a criminal record has done. Just psychologically, just created this invisible barrier that we are just not allowed to cross over into. And it's a way for us to try to live and to move forward, with our life after we have served our time. Our debt is paid.
Now, I have a hard time believing that there are a ton of Off-Kilter listeners who are listening to this and going like, oh yeah, but people don't deserve second chances, because we generally have a slightly more progressive listenership who, because I also talk a lot about these issues a lot, are probably well-versed in these issues. But just staying with it for a moment so that we can sort of lay some of that foundation. 100 million is the estimate, right, of people with criminal records in the US. So when I use the phrase criminal records crisis, I don't use that lightly. That's about 1 in 3 Americans who now have some type of criminal record. And that's part of why you and I first met. Was I was writing reports on this subject, and you were starting to get involved with the Clean Slate New York campaign, and we're going to talk more about that because I referenced that up top. But it's 100 million people and then their families, right, who are facing the barriers that you're describing, whether that's to jobs, whether that's to housing, whether that's to education, or even burial insurance, as you were describing. I mean, I don't even have words for that one. And for anyone who might be listening and going, yeah, but you made a mistake and so you need to pay for it. We're talking about, as you said, after someone has paid their so-called debt to society and done all the things that they're told by society to do and is trying to re-enter. And we should also just be aware, most people come home, right, from prison. About 97%-ish are actually going to come home. So that's the sort of national picture, zooming out from the experience you were just describing. And now to bring us to maybe a more of a good news side of this conversation, that was why you got involved, and this is how we met, with a campaign called Clean Slate, which is very close to my heart, and also which has had some really, really exciting developments in New York because of Clean Slate New York legislation getting passed by the Assembly earlier this year. So let's maybe switch gears to talking a little bit about some of the solutions and some of the excitement on addressing that criminal records crisis that you have been so core to building momentum to address. How did you first get involved with the Clean Slate New York campaign and decide to work on that legislation?
Yeah, I initially just started, literally like just sort of on my own. And I grabbed a couple of supporters and close friends of mine who, I told the story to, and just went on this path of how could I begin. So I started by sort of hosting dinners and call a feast for fair chance, right? To just educate people around this thing, right, that exists, this collateral consequences, or this perpetual punishment that exists, because some people may take for granted, of the belief that, hey, a person finishes their sentence, hey, just do the right thing and you'll be fine. Like, just go out and get a job and don't commit another crime. And did not know that because of your criminal record, you could be denied. So I'm just doing the education. And then a friend of mine had sent me an application link around Next 100 to do this work. And I was like, whoa, okay. And I signed up for it. They brought me on board to focus on Clean Slate. to at that time, I was looking at the language of expungement. I didn't really know, right, the sealing and expungement and what those things. And so a lot of learning went into play. And of course, I eventually connected with you, and you know, your introduction to some organizations that were already planning to execute this campaign, and they said, "Hey, yeah, let's make it happen," and brought me on board as well.
And I feel like we should also do a little bit of table setting and explain what Clean Slate is. You mentioned expungement and sealing. These all get to be like wonky legalistic terms, but we're talking about clearing criminal records, right? What is it that enables a person to have a clean record so that they can get that job or get that housing or have that fair shot at getting into school or volunteer for their kids, after school program or whatever it is, right? So we're talking about record clearing, but maybe help us back up a little bit and explain why you got involved and why so many other folks have gotten involved with the idea of making criminal record clearing automatic. Criminal record clearing is something that does, as you noted, exist in virtually all states in some form or fashion. But what got you interested in this idea of making that access to record clearing automatic for folks?
Because there's also even a barrier to some of the law that exists where there was sort of this application base where you can apply, right, to have your record sealed. So in the state of New York, it was you can only have 2 convictions. There was limitations. You had to apply. You needed to have legal representation. There was a whole gambit of things that you had to do that made it virtually impossible to have those records clear. And then there was a limited amount of people who would have access to this. And then it just didn't make sense. And it was not fair that we had to go back before the judge and the prosecutor to determine whether or not our records should be sealed, when our contract, right, my sentence, you've already sentenced me. I've done what you and this system has already asked me to do. I'm finished with this. Why do I now need to come back to you and sort of almost to some degree have a trial again? Because the prosecutor is coming in the application-based form, the prosecutor is coming in to argue why not, and possibly bring in people and hope that they're emotionally still connected to a thing, right, to say no. And so it just didn't make sense. It's because, when you're off for parole, it happens automatic. You don't apply to get, you're off for parole. When you finish your sentence, they let you out the door. If I'm done, this process should be just automatic. The same as everything else is just automatic, and it should be sealed so that we're allowed to move forward.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also worth mentioning that a lot of the criminal records crisis that you've been describing and that we've been talking about was actually really sort of an accidental consequence of the rise of technology. Because as we had more and more access to data becoming the norm, right now we've got 9 in 10 employers are using background checks and hiring. That didn't used to be the case because that wasn't technologically feasible. 4 in 5 landlords are using background checks when it comes to screening tenants, right? And 3 in 5 educational institutions are using, it goes on, right? So it's that immense access to digital records and sort of the digitalization of our criminal justice system, if you can call it that, that actually paved the way for a record to follow you for the rest of your life. It didn't actually used to quite be that way in the US because the data didn't follow you. So talking then back about Clean Slate, this is some of why making that record clearance automatic once someone has satisfied the terms of their sentence, like you said, and moved on with their life, makes sense to a lot of folks. Now that idea which started out in Pennsylvania and started to spread across the country and then made its way to New York, has become, it hasn't become law in New York just yet because it's waiting on the governor to sign. And so if anyone from the New York governor's office is listening, there's lots of folks watching and very, very eager for you to go ahead and sign that legislation. But it did pass the assembly, which is a huge deal and something that had not been possible in multiple rounds of the New York assembly. Who stands to be helped once the governor does sign this clean slate legislation in New York? And how are you feeling on the other side of that huge victory?
So 2.3 million New Yorkers possess a criminal record. So we're saying 2.3 million and their families stand to have relief once this is signed, and I don't, I've been going through a lot of feelings just around this, this thing. Sometimes you just don't know where your life is going to land and who you're going to be in the world sometime. And so for me, it just started off as a thing for me that was just impacting me. I knew that it impacted my community and my family personally. And I just feel, just really relieved that a lot of my friends and family and people that I know that are struggling and have been struggling for quite some time will finally have some relief, and that the people coming behind us never have to experience a lot of what we've had to experience over the years just by having these barriers in play. And, feeling, a friend had asked me, this question before as well. And it was also a feeling of, even in the midst of me doing the things that I've done in order to go to prison, literally the intent was to try to fix something. And I've always been a person to try to fix something, and I just was misguided. And this is a thing that I think that I helped fix and help people. And that has been my feelings around it. Like, I finally feel like, okay, I fixed something, and I've contributed differently, right, to people, and so that's the feeling. That's the feeling. And I know, a bunch of other feelings will come as, once it's actually signed. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I know it's emotional stuff and it's heart stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, thank you for being comfortable sharing that, and also just for bringing the emotions in, because I feel them too. And I think I have a clean slate tattoo going back to when we got it done in Pennsylvania back in 2018. So I feel like in moments like this, when I'm in conversation with leaders like you, and it starts to get emotional, I always say I can kind of feel the tattoo burning a little bit, where it's like, yep, this is real. So I'm really excited to get to talk with you the day that the governor does sign, to celebrate that moment. And 2.3 million is a huge number of people who stand to be helped, and their families as well. One of the things that I want to ask you before we move on and talk about you and how you do this work and who you are coming to this work as well, is we're talking about New York, right? We're talking about, in some ways, kind of ground zero for some of the worst narratives that we have heard in recent memory when it comes to criminal justice reform, right? And this really kind of started to pick up after the midterms in the last Congress. We heard, lots of backlash to bail reform, which had been a huge victory that advocates were very excited for in New York. I'm curious, if you have any thoughts or wisdom or observation to share about how it was possible to get something so momentous and life-changing done and through the New York Assembly at a time where it might seem like so little is possible when it comes to criminal justice reform, whether in New York or in the national conversation as well.
Again, like I said in the beginning, I think it was common sense. It was a common sense, it was common sense legislation, right? Because we have what is reality. Reality is 97% of individuals who go to prison will be released from prison. They will be released. Many of them will come directly back to the communities in which their crimes have been committed to some degree. They will come back to these communities. And the big question is, how do you want them to return? How do you want them to return? You ask any civilized, person, anyone with just any sort of common sense, you want them to return rehabilitated. You want them to return to the community contributing. You want them to be productive citizens. If they're going to be in your neighborhood, they're going to be with you. They're going to be your next door neighbor. You want to feel safe. What currently exists does not allow that to be the case. You want a person to come home with barriers and restrictions? That is the foundation. That is the heartbeat of recidivism. Because if I am unable to live, to get employed, to have a livable wage, to have somewhere to live, it's possible I may return back to the very thing that landed me in prison in the beginning in order to get those things. And so I think, again, it was common sense legislation, and the fact that, people are beginning to see like this playbook that, a lot of the opposition has been spilling around safety and things of that nature. It's getting old. It's the same thing. It's very old. The narrative is consistent, right? Safety. And the thing is, this current system doesn't have us any safer. It doesn't. It's not proven to be us, to bring us safer. It has not proven to reduce crime. It has not proven to address mental health. It has not proven to address addiction. It has not proven to do any of those things, right? There's no business that you would allow to continue to have going that has been failing. This is the only business model that they've allowed to continue to fail. And, and the truth of the matter is, I don't think it's failing. It's working just the way they actually want it to work. And so people are beginning to see that we have to do something different. This is not a get out of jail free card. This is not, removing people from being accountable for what it is that they have done. Right? This is not, none of this is that. This is, no, people have served their time. They are finished. They are already in the community with you. They are your next door neighbor. You are riding on the train with them. You are at the restaurants with them. Already, they're here and been here for years. Many has been 20, 30, but so it was common sense. And I think that is what assisted in a lot of the momentum, as well as other approaches to what organizing and activism, look like. I mean, especially for me, I didn't come into this like really understanding that, I think I've done organizing in my life, right? If I really look back and look at some of the skills that I had in the street and, some of the things that I've done with young people, yeah, I was already an organizer, right? But it just looked different to some degree to what, some of the, organizing and advocacy work looked like, utilizing art and, so forth and so on, which was some of the ways that I attack the situation, to actually be directly in connection and communicating with those who are directly impacted, right? How do we go right into the neighborhoods that have been impacted and empower, help to empower them and uplift their voices to champion this?
Yeah, and that point about public safety, right? I mean, I think no one probably disagrees with the idea that we all want safe communities. Everyone wants to live in a safe community. That's a universal. The question is what's going to get us there, right? And I think you really hit the nail on the head with, that's actually what a policy like Clean Slate does, is it makes our communities safer because, as you said so beautifully, how do you want folks coming home, right? With no options and every door closed in their face and no job and no housing? No, that's going to send people right back to choices you make when you don't have a choice, right? But what actually enables people to turn their lives around is being able to have that secure footing. And we know the data bear this out as well. We won't go into that now, but the analyst in me that used to write these reports is ticking off those numbers, all the social science data about what we know about recidivism. Zaki, you mentioned, and this is where I want to go next in this conversation, so we don't spend all of our time talking about law and policy, as much as that's part of what we need to talk about, because that's part of the tools you work with. So you mentioned art and murals and the use of art as a tool for social justice activism, for criminal justice activism. I would love to give you a chance to talk a little bit about this, because I've had you on this podcast multiple times now, and we haven't really had a chance to talk about your work with murals. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you have used art as a tool for criminal justice reform, and how that came to speak to you as a tool to use, since it's not exactly what most policy advocates and activists think about as the tools in our toolbox.
Art has been, I'm a part of, the inception of sort of hip hop, right? So it was like the DJ, the dancer, the MC, and, graffiti and art, right? And so I come up in that era just around art. And so one of the ways that I've utilized art was literally with my young people in schools, right? And transforming spaces, because one of the things that we acknowledged in school spaces, that school spaces was not inviting to young people, right? They were really like prison beige, prison gray. These are like these very plain colors. And so, me and my team of us, we utilize art to bring life into spaces, to communicate things in spaces. And so I said, why not bring that directly to our community, right? How do we have a message to our community to ask them, to have them have this same question that I had? Wait a minute. This is what it feels like here. Why is this the case, right? And so not only just taking art and I'm going to put this piece up and walk away, but like, how do we put this piece up and invite the community to the art and have a conversation around the art, educate the people around the art? What does this particular piece actually means? What exists? And you will find out the very thing that has been boiling in them that they just not at the moment could identify and articulate it. That piece of art just explained it for them. It just explained it. It said, that's what it is. That's exactly what I'm feeling. I'm feeling that right there. And now, how could I change it? What could I do? Right? And so this has been an experience with me with art. So not only just murals, again, when I first started, I did a Feast for Fair Chance, and I did an art. I partnered with two individuals, Jenny and Hannah, at the New School, and they bonded with me, and we did a project. We illustrated this booklet, right? Art illustrated this booklet around from release to, from prison to release and the barriers. And we did an illustration of it, and we shared it in these dinners to have conversation. And I met so many people in this space as a result of it, just utilizing those illustrations and art, and DJing, right? I'm a DJ too, like being able to play music during our time of when the COVID was happening and we were doing Zoom, and like being able to DJ our meetings and things like that, our coalition meetings, and bringing people on and just like bringing the art form into the space and uplifting folks. And that's just the way that I communicate, is through art, through direct human connection. Even with barbering, I'm a barber by trade, so that's how I connected with the community as well. That one-on-one interaction with folks and just having that moment. And so that was my point of entry.